Oh, hi. Welcome to Aquata Zoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how to build trust. This is something that I reference a lot because it's kind of necessary. If you are going to lead a team or be a part of a team that is going to be successful and smooth operating, then it is necessary to develop some trust between team members and between the supervisor or the leader and the team members. So I guess it makes sense. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to figure out that I needed to cover it. But let's talk about how to build trust. Being the aquarium and zoo professional that I am, I often reference this specifically when talking about animals because it is an absolute necessity if you're going to use positive reinforcement with animals and encourage them to take part in their own care, mainly their health care in particular. You have to build a relationship with them. If you're going to walk into their space and they accept you, it takes work for that to happen. They don't automatically think this ginormous human is not a danger to me and it's actually a positive thing. Like, they're going to cower, they're going to lash out, they're going to do various other animal natural behaviors that we probably would not enjoy too much if we don't build some sort of relationship with these animals and get them to understand that we mean them no harm, that we want them to think of us in a positive way, react positively to remain comfortable, because that's really how we get the best exhibit animals. They're more likely to exhibit those natural behaviors that people are looking for when they come to a zoo or an aquarium. They want to see them sniffing around, digging for stuff, and, climbing things, depending on the type of animal, flying around, whatever. Depending on the type of animal, we're talking about a certain style of behavior that they're expecting to see when they see that animal. And so to see an animal cowering in fear in a corner, that's not what we're looking for, right? So there has to be some trust built in there, some relationship or some comfort addressed, so that they feel like they can exhibit those natural behaviors because they're not worried about what's that human going to do? What are all these people staring at me for? Like, we as keepers have to just put in some effort to establish some positive intent, positive relationship with the animals. And oddly enough, the same works for people. It's a little bit more complicated, a little bit more sophisticated, and in some cases a little bit easier because at least we can talk to each other. So let's just start with the talking part. Yeah, we have it easier with other humans in that we can discuss things. We use our voices, we use our words. And yes, there are language barriers. Yes, there are culture barriers that make it kind of difficult. And then there are just communication barriers. You might be speaking the same language as somebody on your team, but for whatever reason, it does not go well, or whatever you're saying seems to fall on deaf ears, right? If you've ever dealt with something like that, I totally understand. I had a supervisor at one point where we were both speaking English, but just the way our brains worked and the way we expressed ourselves, it was so different that we constantly misunderstood each other. And that worked both ways. I realize that now. I definitely didn't at the time. But I thought I was being very clear and very logical and very everything about what I was saying to this person, and this person did not understand what I was saying or my intent behind it. They were kind of reading into the words that I was using and drawing a different meaning from it, right? So that was not my intent. And so we just constantly misunderstood one another. And that is both of our bad, I guess. If I could redo it now, I probably would have paid more attention with how that person communicates and how the phrasing is different and how maybe the tone plays into it or the body language, right? So honestly, I was getting annoyed, so my body language would change. And then I think that person would read that and really start reacting to my body language rather than the words I was using, right? So it automatically put them kind of on the defensive. And then we just didn't have a productive conversation after that. And I think now that I'm paying more attention to how I learn and my habits and things, I'm definitely more of an auditory person, hence a podcast, right? But I think looking back on it now and knowing myself better, I think that I was reading something different in this supervisor's tone that I don't think was really meant to be like that. It wasn't meant to be interpreted the way that I did, but we just had very different ways of communicating and different ways of interpreting what other people were trying to communicate to us. It was just a rough situation. And it caused a lot of heartache and a lot of frustration. I think I would handle it a little bit differently now and put a lot more effort into understanding what the other person is trying to communicate, how they operate, and just try to have more neutral conversations so that I could better understand how they communicate in general. And that's what it takes, right? You just got to practice. So if you're trying to figure out how someone else communicates and how you're going to communicate to one another, the same as we do with animals, we just try. And sometimes it works out well, sometimes it doesn't. As long as you're kind of clear about the fact that you're trying and that there's going to be mistakes and that you apologize if you can. We'll get to that later. Just understanding that you're creating like a learning environment where you're just trying to figure out what the other person wants, needs as far as communication goes. It's the same thing that we do with animals. We try a couple of things and then we realize, oh, that animal did not react well to me standing up that fast or something like that. Yes, you can get there eventually if you work at it and make sure that the animal understands that when you stand up quickly, it doesn't mean anything detrimental to them. It's just something that is going to happen and they will get used to it, right? And so people are the kind of the same way. They might not like the way you said something or you did something, but with repeated practice and more communication and attempts to understand one another, you're going to get a clearer picture of how someone communicates and how they hope to be communicated with, right? I'm sure you've worked with somebody who you hear a piece of information and you know off the bat that that person is not going to take that well unless you deliver it, right? Maybe you're close enough, maybe you're similar enough that you know how you need to deliver that piece of information to that person in a way where they're not going to be upset, where they're not going to be on the defensive about it, where they're going to be able to really understand what that means. And so, maybe you deem yourself the one that's going to communicate that piece of information. I've had this happen plenty of times in my lifetime, so that's what I kind of mean here. And so when you're dealing with a team and most likely coworkers, you don't always have the luxury of just ignoring someone who you don't communicate well with or who you don't get along with. You might have to do it because that's your coworker and that is your job. So you might not be able to avoid delivering some piece of information that your coworker is not going to like, right? And so naturally, I think we try to figure out how to do that sort of thing without upsetting the other person. I think that's a pretty regular thing. You have to do the thing, right? It's your job. So you kind of learn how you have to do it in a way that's effective. Even if you don't love it, even if they don't love it, you figure out a way. That's what I mean with the communication. You got to figure out how to communicate so that you can function, so that they can function, so that one little thing is not going to set off the whole team, right? And so as a supervisor, especially, if you're going to be the one to try and lead this team, you've got to develop some sort of understanding of how your team needs you to communicate to them. And it may be individual. You may have to separate the one person from the rest of the team because the rest of the team takes it this way, but that one person needs a little bit more attention in another way, right? And so you just have to figure that out. And that's part of communicating. And I would like to emphasize as part of this, it does not matter how you want to say it and how you prefer to communicate the thing. It matters how the other person does. In my situation with that supervisor who didn't understand me very well, it probably was more on that person's side that they should have kind of looked at the situation and navigated that to better accommodate me. Not that I want to be catered to or anything, but I was young and I was not as well versed in the field and not as responsible for the well-being of my team. That was my supervisor's job at that time. So in theory, it would have been more on that person to navigate this. If you are the supervisor in your team or you're the leader in your group, then yeah, that's more on you. You're expected to do that because that is part of the job. And more than likely, you have a little bit more knowledge and experience under your belt and can free your brain power up to navigate that communication piece a little bit better. So just understand that it doesn't matter how you want to communicate that, how you prefer to communicate. It matters how the person or the people that you're trying to communicate to are going to prefer that, because then the information transfer is a little bit more complete and a little bit more clear. And so there's less likelihood of misunderstanding and anger and frustration. So it's in your best interest to learn how they communicate and how they prefer to hear information and, what kind of environment they want to be in. Do they want to be in a group where there's support from everyone? Do they want to be individuals so they can kind of digest it on their own? You have to figure out all these things, which is a lot of work. But guess what? If you're the leader, that's part of your job. Does that seem a little bit unfair? Maybe, but I promise the more success that you have at this kind of thing, and I guess the longer you're in a leadership type position and the better you see your team doing as a result of you putting in this work to try and figure this out, the more you're going to be behind it, right? The more smooth sailing you will have as a team and the more success you'll have, the faster you'll be able to get stuff done because everybody understands what's going on, what the stakes are, that kind of thing, because you've communicated it effectively. You'll have other leaders coming to you asking, what's your secret or whatever. But it's not really a secret. I'm telling you right now, figure out how your team communicates and you'll be a little bit better off. Now, there are some times where you can communicate to people in the way they would prefer, and then there's sometimes where you can't, just maybe because of the nature of the information. Like, say, you've got people who on your team who prefer to hear information and kind of navigate that in a group. But if it's confidential, you might only have to, or only be allowed to take one person at a time to do that, right? And so that is unfortunate, but hopefully they also can meet you in the middle somewhere. And hopefully you've had enough good conversations at that point that you have started at least to develop some trust so that they know that when you pull them into the office on their own, like, this isn't like a punishment kind of discussion. This is just like, a confidentiality, a relatively harmless transfer of information on an individual basis. It depends on your job. It depends on the task, the information at hand. And, yes, you have to cater to the person some, and that will lead you to more success. But I obviously know that that's not always a possibility. And hopefully you've developed some trust so that they can meet you in the middle somewhere and you don't have to be so nervous about how they're going to take it or what they're going to think or say. And you can have an honest conversation about it because you've put in the work, you're trying to understand each other. And as they come to realize that you're not out to get them or you're not trying to cause trouble, they will be more likely to meet you where you are. a little in the middle, I guess. Not necessarily where you are, but at least not you reaching all the way over to them. It could be in the center someplace. So let's talk about when they deliver information to you. As the leader, as the supervisor, be consistent about your response, because if you let your mood or your status for the day, maybe you spilled your coffee on your lap this morning. That's fresh in my mind because I did it earlier this week. But if you let the things that are inconveniencing you bother you all day, and then that affects how you take in information and what your reaction is, that's a problem. You need to control that a little bit better. I guess if you're going to fly off the handle, you need to do it every time so that they understand what to expect from you. Not that that's good. I would not recommend it because they're going to be afraid to tell you things and be honest with you because of your reaction being wild. but at least they know what to expect. And if it comes down to it and they have to tell you something, they're just going to do it and then, walk away quickly. Drop that, walk away. But if you can be more cognizant of your response and make sure that it's relatively measured and that you are consistent about it. So when somebody brings you bad news, you don't start a swearing fit, you don't start throwing things, punching walls, whatever. You take it in stride and maybe ask if they have any solutions to this problem, right? Do something hopefully calm. I would definitely recommend calm, but I can't control you, only you can. Try to be calm and be very consistent about your response. You should also try to be consistent with how you deal with the issues, right? So if they come to you and say that another coworker is doing something that's against policy, you need to follow through and handle it the way you are supposed to according to your organization. So that means that there's not any double standards about, well, this person comes in late. I usually use tardiness as an example just because it's easy and we all understand what it looks like. But let's say this person comes in late all the time. This other person doesn't come in late all the time. They're on time and ready to go. But say after a couple of times you see that that person who's normally on time starts to drift a little bit later, and you get mad about that and you start punishing that one person, but that original one who's always late, that's not a big deal for them, right? Like you react differently based on who is doing the thing wrong. That is not okay. You need to be consistent about how you dole out your talks, your discussions about what is right and what is wrong. Be consistent about how you apply policy in your organization, because otherwise it's going to get very confusing and there's going to be resentment that builds, which is going to destroy your team. Being consistent in stuff like this is really, really difficult. So when you're dealing with somebody who's not doing quite the right thing in your group and you like them a lot and you don't want them to be upset, and so you just don't say anything, but then somebody else does something similar and you follow through on the policy and they maybe receive some corrective action, right? And so you've got these two people next to each other and now you've got a problem because everybody saw that happen. The people involved are probably mad. So it's a hard thing to do because it means you have to have some really tough conversations, and that's never fun. I'm not even going to pretend that it is. Those of us who are conflict avoidant do not love this, right? Because you want everyone to be happy. You want everyone to get along. You want everything to run smoothly, but stuff happens. People make mistakes, and it's okay to correct the mistakes so that they don't continue to be a problem and then just breed resentment in your group. And being consistent in your response to your folks coming to talk to you is also really important and sometimes very hard to do. When you're having a really bad day and all you want to do is just scream. I have weathered many issues and yelling fits because somebody was just having a bad day. Maybe they're in pain. Maybe something happened at home and they're just in a foul mood. And then the one thing that I say sets them off because I delivered some kind of information that they needed to know and it needed to be brought to light. But that was the last straw, right? I've had those conversations before as the team member, not the supervisor, but the team member. And it's horrific. I never want to do that again. I know it's going to happen again, I'm sure, because bad leaders are out there, right? And team members do this too, and they may not realize they're doing it. But, people are people. We all make mistakes, and one of them is sometimes taking out anger and sadness and frustration on people who don't deserve it. And so we as leaders need to be more cognizant of how we're presenting ourselves in that way and how we react to things. And if you need to, just ask for a little break. If somebody comes to you and brings you news you did not want to hear that day and you feel like your blood boiling, just ask them if they can come back later, or if they'd mind if you just walked away for a few and took a little walk outside, get some fresh air. It's okay to excuse yourself, to collect yourself. We all need to do that sometimes, and it's really important for your mental health. And it's important so that you don't say something or do something that you will regret later, because then you have other issues you got to deal with, the aftermath of that kind of thing. And so leaders in particular need to be very, very aware of how they're presenting themselves, how they're reacting to things, what their team is witnessing in their reaction, because then the team also is observing you as a role model. And they see what you do and how you're reacting to things, and they draw conclusions from that, or they learn from you, even if you don't intend them to do it. For a while there, I was exhibiting some really bad behavior that I had seen in a supervisor. It was unacceptable and not what I should have been doing. And it took me a long time to realize that. I'm a little bit more cognizant these days. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I do try to do better every day. And that's the best you can do, right? Just be better than you were the day before. So when it comes to these things, if you make a mistake, if you lash out at somebody who didn't deserve it, or if you miscommunicate and you get frustrated and you're not acting with consistency, you're not acting, trying to build trust, there's always the apology. This is a tool that I highly recommend, even for the most stubborn of people. If you feel guilty, if you did something wrong and you recognize that maybe I shouldn't have said it that way, maybe I should have reacted a little differently, please go up to the person or the people that you feel like you may have wronged and just apologize to them and mean it. Do not offer false apologies, because that's just patronizing. It'll make them mad. Worse, I guess. It'll make the whole situation worse. So recognize when you might have done something that you didn't really think was your best, and maybe you didn't deliver the message you were intending to, maybe you did it in a harsher way than you intended, and you want to make it right. We can't necessarily do that with animals as much, because we don't communicate with our words with them necessarily. Like, they don't understand what I'm saying when I say, "I'm so sorry, little guy," They don't necessarily understand that. What we typically do as trainers is just go back to trying to build that trust from square one again, which usually means, offering them a snack and reinforcing them with good things so that they understand that we mean them no harm. With people, you can apologize and you can explain yourself, and please try to be as honest about this as you can. It will yield the best results typically. And just be aware that saying that you're sorry and explaining where your head was at maybe, or what was going on that led you to do that, that builds trust between people. Because let's say it's your team member, somebody that you supervise, somebody that you're leading, they see that you are human, that you made a mistake, and that you're willing to own up to it. And it encourages them to do the same when they make a mistake. So you're not making this entire culture of anger and blaming and hiding your mistakes and not being honest, because that does not build trust. Being honest builds trust. When you make a mistake and maybe you're not consistent, or maybe you're not very clear, that is okay as long as you own up to it and you make sure that they understand that wasn't your intention, that you're trying to do better, and that you're trying to correct mistakes that you made and be a better team member to them. Now, if you make somebody upset and then you just walk up to them and you say, "I'm sorry you felt that way," that's not an apology, P.S. That's patronizing and it's not going to go over well. So you need to own up to your portion of what went wrong, and then offer a sincere apology for what happened and your part that you played in that issue. I've had supervisors who were told to apologize to me for things that they did wrong, and it came out so poorly that it made things worse. "Oh, I'm so sorry you felt that way." And it's like, okay, well, that's not an apology, because it doesn't say anything about you. You're apologizing for me, which is not appropriate, because in that case, I had not done anything wrong. It was just a blow up between a couple of people on the team, right? And so in that case, I hadn't done anything wrong. I've done plenty of things wrong, but in that case, I hadn't done anything wrong. And the person that was told to apologize for me because it caused an absolute rift in the team did an apology that made things worse. And that's unfortunate. So be mindful of how you're apologizing too, because that could build trust, but it could also destroy it. So be honest and don't offer an apology unless you are acknowledging your fault in the issue and hopefully that you're trying to make it better. Now, the thing about apologies that is a little bit different is that you can offer up a sincere apology all you want. It is not up to you whether that person accepts it or not. You're just putting it out there. It's up to them whether they believe you, whether they accept it, whether they want to move on, whether they forgive you. They may want to move on, but they may not forgive you, even if you've offered a very sincere apology. And that's not for you to worry about. That is their business. And you can continue. I would encourage you to continue to try to build trust in all these various ways. But it may be a long road before you actually earn that forgiveness that you've asked for. So just understand that an apology is kind of a one-sided thing. You should, I hope, acknowledge your part that you played in it, acknowledge that you made a mistake, offer the apology. Hopefully it's accepted and hopefully you're forgiven, but you may not be, and you need to be okay with that. It can be frustrating to offer a very sincere apology that is not accepted. That person is still so angry. That issue is still so raw. Whatever happened was so egregious that they are not ready to forgive. And you have to deal with that. And you have to accept it. And you have to move on and try to do the next right thing. So I would definitely encourage you in that case to continue trying to build trust. It's not easy. It's not fun necessarily. But if you made a mistake that damaged the relationship so badly, then yeah, you've got some work to do. It's not a lost cause necessarily. And maybe at the end, you will come to at least some mutual understanding that you're not the best of friends, but you can work together. I've had that happen before. It's not my favorite relationship that I've ever had with a coworker, but we made it work at the end. And that's okay too. I am proud of the fact that we at least got that far. And so that's an accomplishment too. Otherwise, we would have been butting heads every single day for the rest of eternity. And that's not fun. So yeah, have conversations. Try to understand how those people around you communicate and what they like, what they don't like, how they prefer to be communicated with, how they don't, how you can deliver information to them, whether it's good or bad, and how you shouldn't. You develop that kind of thing without even trying almost. If you're just consistent in your discussions, talk about work stuff, talk about hobbies, talk about things you like, you don't like, all that kind of stuff. Probably not politics right now. That's not the best way, but you never know. Personal choice, I guess. But you learn how to communicate. You can learn how to deliver information to people in an effective way. Be consistent with how you react to things and how you handle issues with the team. Make sure if you're doling out punishment, it's kind of like according to policy, and hold everyone to the same standard because it's only fair. Keep your promises. Also, I didn't really mention that, but if you say something to somebody that you're trying to do or that you're trying to accomplish, give them a reason why it didn't happen if it doesn't happen, and just keep your promises. Makes you more trustworthy that way. It's kind of a natural thing. And then if you do find that you made a mistake and that you did something that you're not proud of, or maybe you overreacted or something like that, something out of character, something that they did not expect of you, own your part in that and apologize. The apology can really, really help the situation and make them understand that you make mistakes and that they are free to make mistakes, and that apologies work to smooth things over, if not fix it entirely, but also understand that they may not accept it because whatever happened was so bad and was so painful that they're not ready to be buddy again with you. And it may not be forever, but it just may be for now. And you will have to be okay with that. So get out there, build some trust with your team, because you'll all be better for it. All right, if you have any questions about that or any other leadership or management things or zoo and aquarium stuff, feel free to write it up in an email and send it to me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all of that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you'd like to take a vacation and you don't know where to start, I happen to be a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra. The links are in the show notes. Okay, thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.